So about a year ago on the channel, I made a video titled How Derry won their first Ulster title in 24 years. It was certainly an interesting video to make, and obviously going back and looking at Derry's story and how they very much rose from the wilderness in many ways to win an Ulster title was nothing short of remarkable. Derry were a side that had very much hit rock bottom just a couple of years previous. They'd been relegated down to Division 4, and honestly Derry just looked a million miles off what we see today. However, with the work that's been put in with Derry behind the scenes, the unity of clubs coming together, the return of players like Conor Glass from the AFL, the emergence of younger players coming through the under-20s, and the brilliant performances from the veterans of Chrissy McCaig, Brendan Rodgers and Shane McGuigan, Derry football are looking as strong as ever, and it's been one hell of a rise over the last couple of years. And when I made that video a year ago, the main sort of following on, or the next sort of question about Derry football, especially going into 2023, was could Derry now seriously challenge for the All-Ireland Championship? They'd won an Ulster title, and what an incredible achievement that was. But as we very well know, sides who usually do very well in Ulster do tend to go on and compete for All-Ireland, sometimes even win it, in the case of the likes of Tyrone, Donegal and even Armagh going as far back as the early 2000s. Of course, that's not always the case. I mean, there's been plenty of teams down the years who've been very good in Ulster but have struggled to actually do well in the All-Ireland Championship, and even Donegal recently in the last 5 or 6 years have been a perfect example of that. But Derry, as we very well know, have a wealth of great players, and this year there was going to be a lot of questions asked and a lot of questions answered, because last year when they came up against Galway in the All-Ireland semi-finals, they were beaten comfortably, and there was this narrative around Derry for the entirety of 2024, really up until their recent defeat to Kerry, that Derry struggle in Croke Park, and they struggle in big games in Croke Park, and the way that they play and their style isn't exactly suited to Croke Park, and it won't get them an All-Ireland title. That's what everyone had been saying, and that's what the general narrative had been around Derry football going into 2023, and the general consensus was that Derry's style of football will not land them the All-Ireland title. And as we very well know, Derry did not win the All-Ireland title in 2023. They were beaten in the semi-finals by Kerry, but it's fair to say that it was another very successful season for Derry football. If you go back to the start of the season and you go back to Division 2, they were very much expected to get out of Division 2. I think, that goes without saying. Obviously with Dublin in there was going to be a bit of a challenge, but Derry cruised to promotion. They finished first in Division 2. They did lose the Division 2 final to Dublin, but they looked very good in the process in terms of how they'd won promotion. A win versus Dublin in Celtic Park very much solidified that Derry are a serious team. But even at that, their defeat to Dublin in Croke Park did leave a lot of lingering in terms of, are Derry a serious football team? Are they a team that can seriously challenge for the All-Ireland? In Ulster, things were fairly straightforward for Derry. They beat Fermanagh and then they brushed aside Monaghan fairly comfortably. And then in the build-up to the Ulster final, something big happened. And obviously for legal reasons, I can't go into too much detail about this, but as we very well know, Rory Gallagher resigned as Derry senior football manager just a couple of days before the Ulster final. All you can do is just look on Google if you don't know why he resigned, and you'll find out the reasons. As I said, I can't go into too much detail about it, unfortunately. But if we're focusing about matters on the pitch and obviously the game itself, Kieran Meena was the man who stepped in as Derry manager. And they were coming up against a very good Armagh side. Don't get me wrong, Armagh have had their problems this year at different moments, relegated from Division 1, and they certainly had a lot of questions around them as well. But this was going to be a tough test for Derry. Everything that would have went on during the week, new manager coming in, fair enough, he'd already been there and been a part of Rory Gallagher's backroom team. But the general consensus amongst Derry supporters and neutrals was that how was this going to affect the Derry players, and how are they going to deal with this going into such a big game in Ulster? And let's not forget as well, although Derry had won the Ulster title a season previous, they weren't exactly serial winners at that moment in time. I mean, they'd won the Ulster title, it was their first Ulster title since the 90s. They hadn't won back-to-back Ulster titles since 1976, and they were coming up against an Armagh side that was so hungry for this championship, having not won it themselves since 2005. But as we very well know, Derry did the business. They got over the line. It was a very close game. It went the entire distance to penalties, and Derry managed to get their hands on the Ulster Championship once again. A serious moment for Derry football, for Conor Glass, for Kieran Meena, and especially after all the disruption during the week with everything that happened, it was a huge moment for Derry football. The defensive style of football very much proven dividends once again. However, with Kieran Meena in charge, there were some slight changes that were starting to happen, and we wouldn't later see them until the later stages of the All-Ireland series. Derry brushed aside Cork fairly convincingly, and then when they played Kerry, Derry very much sort of, I wouldn't say shocked the nation. Everyone was expecting Derry to be in full defensive mode, blanket defence, every man behind the ball, break with pace in the counter-attack and try and frustrate the living daylights out of this Kerry side. But from the get-go, Derry attacked Kerry. They got in behind them. They created chances. They got themselves an early goal. And honestly, on another day, Derry could have won that match. Going into the final 5 to 6 minutes, you remember the look on Jack O'Connor's face. Like, Kerry looked beaten and Derry looked like they had them. And in the end, Kerry managed to do what Kerry do, and they managed to pull it back and win the game. And fair play to Kerry for doing that. There was question marks over some decisions that were made. Honestly, on another day, Derry could have won that game. But one thing it did prove is that Derry do belong at the elite table. And their performance against Kerry was very good. And it certainly has proved that Derry, in my opinion, have the potential to win the All-Ireland next year. And that leads us on to the title of this video, why Derry can win the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship in 2024. Now, you will be thinking straight away, Derry haven't won the All-Ireland since 1993. They've won back-to-back Ulster titles. Maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself is what some people would say. But Derry, for me, pose as the closest team other than Dublin and Kerry to win the All-Ireland next season. If we look at Dublin and Kerry, first of all, obviously, as a Dublin fan, it was a monumental win this year, and seeing us win the All-Ireland was incredible. It's something I did not see coming earlier in the year, and there will be a video out in the next couple of weeks to discuss how it all came about. One thing we would say about Dublin is the feeling I'm getting is that there is going to be a lot of retirements around Dublin this year. There is a sort of last dance feel to this All-Ireland win for Dublin. And don't get me wrong, with the quality of Dublin players and even some of club players in the county, there is good younger players coming through. I think we'll be there or thereabouts over the next couple of years. We mightn't win the All-Ireland every year like we did when we were on that 6 in a row spell. But I think we'll win a couple more All-Irelands in this decade, don't get me wrong. But I think Dublin are beatable. I think that goes without saying. There was a couple of times this year we nearly looked beaten, and I don't think you can definitively say right now that Dublin are nailed on to win the All-Ireland next year like they would have been a couple of years previous when they were dominating, for example. And Kerry, don't get me wrong, have a young enough side and all their players are at the right age profile. David Clifford isn't going to go anywhere. Sean O'Shea isn't going to go anywhere. Lots of good club players around the county. Rumours that Mark O'Connor could potentially be back in the fall for next season. So there's a lot of interest and permutations about Kerry going into next year, and I do think they'll be a lot stronger next year than what we've seen this year, and they would certainly be my front runners next year. But again, not a guarantee. We've seen vulnerabilities with Kerry, and Derry themselves actually nearly beat Kerry a couple of weeks ago. So if they could do it a couple of weeks ago, there's no reasons why they couldn't do it next season if the two were to meet each other again. And I think Derry from 1 to 15 have a seriously good side. I mean, they've one of the best defenders in the game in Chrissy McCaig. Brendan Rodgers and Conor Glass around midfield are absolutely extraordinary. Garrett McKinless in at centre-back has proven himself to be one of the best centre-backs in the game. Forwards-wise is the area where they do struggle. Shane McGuigan did finish as the top scorer in the Derry Senior Football Championship. Lakeland Murray is an up-and-coming star. But the reason why I think Derry could even be better next year is because not only do they have a very good team, they have a good manager in Kieran Meena, but I think the change in management, weirdly enough, with Kieran Meena has come in. Like, I think Derry actually look, and it hasn't really been picked up on by the media. I haven't seen anyone else really see this, but I went back and watched a couple of Derry games in preparation to this video just to validate my point, because I was already thinking this anyway. But Derry have looked a lot more attacking, and they've been playing a lot more free football under Kieran Meena since the change in management. Now, what was that always the plan under Rory Gallagher? I don't really know. Was it always the plan to turn things up and to be better attacking wise in the later parts of the season? We don't really know. But from looking at Derry against Donegal, Derry against Kerry, like, we've seen Derry get on the front foot, get after sides, attack. We're seeing players getting forward. Brendan Rodgers getting into advanced positions. Garrett McKinless getting into advanced positions. Shane McGuigan picking up the ball in the right areas of the field. Players like Kieran McFell, Niall Loughlin proving a lot more attacking than what we've seen in previous seasons. And that's the interesting thing about Derry, is that they do seem a lot more attacking. And I think what we've seen from the last couple of years, and I think what is proven to win All-Ireland Championships, is that you need a balanced team. You know, I think for example, Derry have been on the sort of full defensive spectrum over the last couple of years. I think that can only get you so far. I think it can win provincial titles. It can get you to semi-finals. And there's only so much you can get out of that system. On the opposite side of things, we've seen down the years when Kerry were, you know, sort of in the early years under Peter Keane, or early years of David Clifford, they were very, very attacking, very explosive going forward. But they'd no real system defensively, and they were exposed very much because of that. Mayo are very similar right now as well. I think Mayo have a very good attack, and they're very good at getting forward. And we've seen this year they're a lot better defensively. But at times, like, they don't really have a defensive structure. And what we've seen with Dublin and Kerry this year at times, when these teams are going forward, are absolutely brilliant. But they can switch it just like that. They can go defensive. They can get men behind the ball. They can change systems mid-game. And I think, to be honest with you, that's what teams need to do to win All-Irelands. I think one way of playing is not going to do it. I think Tyrone proved it a couple of years ago in 2021 as well. They were able to get after Kerry's throat, get after Mayo early on, but they were able to sit in and defend what they had as well. So I think finding that balance between defence and attack is key. And for me, I've seen a bit of that from Derry in the semi-finals against Kerry and in their win versus Donegal in the Ulster Championship. Now, against Cork in the quarterfinals and against Monaghan in the group stages, there was a bit of that sort of ultra-defensive mode that we've seen with Derry. But again, I think that was them defending what they had, and those games were very much wrapped up, sort of. I suppose the Monaghan game wasn't, but the Cork game was wrapped up fairly early on, so they were just defending what they had. So I think those kind of shifts could be key for Derry next season. I also think as well is that they're not, like, they only need one or two more quality footballers to come in and do the business for Derry. And I think their underage is very strong. We're seeing the success of the minors. I think next year will definitely be a bit early for a lot of those minors to come in. I think you'll see them either stick around with the minor team or possibly go on and play for the under-20s. But there is something brewing in Derry. There's great underage at the minute. And I think even looking at them in the under-20 championship last year, in the Ulster Championship before their defeat to Down, they have some very, very good players. The likes of Charlie Diamond, I think, could be a great option next season. Matthew Downey, who we've seen wear a Derry shirt in the past, and he's played in the McGrath Cup and everything else, but he could be a good option for Derry as well. And Lakeland Murray is another young player that we've seen on the fringes in the last couple of seasons. So Derry are just slowly growing their panel ever so better over the next couple of years. And honestly, I think winning an All-Ireland is a serious possibility for them next season. I think the only teams that Derry really need to worry about, as long as they play to the same standards next season, which I think that they will, is Dublin and Kerry. They're the only two that I think you can definitively say are ahead of them. But as I've said before, Dublin do have their vulnerabilities. There's going to be question marks over Dublin next year. Can they retain the title? Players aging. Are they going to be sticking around next season? You certainly wouldn't rule them out. And as a Dublin fan, I've learnt my lesson not to rule them out. Kerry, on the other hand side, they're going to be in the conversation. They're going to be hungry. They're going to want to right the wrong of next year. And look, there's going to be other teams that won't be a million miles away. Mayo, Tyrone, Armagh, I think could all have great seasons. But Derry, for me, are definitely the side that are very close to Dublin and Kerry. And if there is a slip up from any one of them two next season, I think Derry could be the ones to capitalise on it. And another thing I've noticed really about Derry from reading between the lines and sort of looking at the big picture is that there is a serious mindset in Derry, and sort of gathered this understanding from looking at Brendan Rodgers on the BBC Social podcast a couple of weeks ago, and even Kieran Mina's post-match interview following their defeat to Kerry, where he talked about they never envisaged losing to Kerry. They always had the belief, they always had the expectation to win, and that the players were in a huge amount of shock that they didn't win. And even Brendan Rodgers openly said on the BBC Social podcast that he will win an All-Ireland before he retires as a Derry footballer. And I just think that sort of mindset is what you need. And I think that sort of attitude in life will get you places. And I think Derry have the right mindset in their team, in their management, and I think they're very, very close. And you know, if they can integrate a couple more players, the likes of Charlie Diamond, the likes of Matthew Downey, if they can get a couple more better forwards, I think they could do it. Midfield-wise, I think they have the best midfield in the country, in my opinion, with Rodgers, Connor Glass. Garrett McKinless outstanding at centre-back. Connor McCluskey has proven his value to this Derry side as well. The goalkeeper is a bit of a question mark over Oren Lynch, and maybe that could certainly be an improvement that Derry should look upon next season, because I don't think he can play that sweeper-keeper type role where he's coming out with the ball. I just don't think he's great with his distribution, to be honest with you, so I think a change in the goalkeeping position could possibly be on the cards next season. But I think all in all, Derry are looking very, very strong. And, you know, I think they've proven this season that 2022 was not just a one-time thing. You know, it wasn't a one-season wonder. I think they've proven that they are going to be thereabouts over the next couple of years. And with the success of the minors and with some of the great under-20s coming through, winning an All-Ireland next season is very possible, and I would be very shocked, to be honest with you, if Derry did not win an All-Ireland in this decade. That's just my opinion. It might be controversial, but I'd be curious to know what people think in the comments down below. Anyway, we'll wrap this up here. Let me know your thoughts. Can Derry win the All-Ireland next season? Can they capitalise on Dublin and Kerry? Obviously, it is a long way away. And of course, obviously, this is just a thought that sort of came to mind and everything else. And we obviously don't have a lot to discuss in the GA world right now. So hence why I'm making this video. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on Derry this season. And what do you think they could achieve going into next year? Chat soon.